This podcast uses adult language.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Elisabeth.
And this is the Less Than 83 podcast. All right, welcome back, Elisabeth.
Hey, Kevin.
So like last week, we were talking about having this episode be about partner selection, asking people out, and flirting.
Yeah.
So kind of the large umbrella of like trying to meet people and trying and expressing your interest in them and like how to try to make that work.
Cool.
Let's start with what you and I are probably the most familiar with is dating within the polyamorous community. So we have a pretty strong local polyamorous community here. It provides you at least the removal of one barrier of knowing whether the person is at all interested in non-monogamy.
Yeah.
Not everybody that comes out to our groups and meetings are polyamorous. Some people are other types of ethically non-monogamous relationships. But then we have people that are also just want to be allies or people who are interested but not sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the hard things out in regular everyday world is the social default is monogamy.
Yeah.
Trying to date within the polyamorous community, like I was saying, kind of avoids the pitfalls of some of that. So what has your experience been dating in the poly community?
Pretty positive, for one thing. I definitely find it's easier to date within the polyamorous community rather than outside of it because, like you said, that barrier is already removed. You know that everybody there at least understands the basic concept of polyamory, So it's a good start. I find that within the polyamorous community, there's usually a lot of crossover with other communities that I'm part of, like the kink community and the pagan community and the queer community. So there's so much crossover that I find lots of people that I have a lot of things in common with. And there's a lot of crossover at events, local events within these communities. I see polyamorous people in all of these communities. So yeah, a lot of crossover, a lot of cool people. I mostly will, like if I meet someone at a poly event and I think they're cute and I want to talk a little bit, then I'll introduce myself at the event and then maybe we'll exchange like, your Facebook username or whatever, like with some website or maybe phone numbers, and then we'll chat from there. And I think that's pretty standard when it comes to dating. One method is online polyamory groups.
Yeah.
But of course, like DMing somebody immediately is not recommended. You want to get to know each other in a group setting first, usually.
And this isn't dungeon mastering. This is direct messaging.
Yeah, direct messaging, sorry. Or PMing, private messaging. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, so there are different ways to like pursue someone. And I know that especially straight white cis males, there's a feeling that you have to diminish what might come off as aggressive or scary in some way because, you've got physical differentiations and there's like a power differential in our society. And so it's good to be mindful of those things. My husband says the same stuff.
Yeah.
There are definitely different ways to like talk to people, new friends in the polyamorous community. I find that like I mostly date my friends.
Yeah.
I make most of my friends are within these communities that I've mentioned, and those friendships often evolve into something else. And I think that's great because then I already have a foundation of like, we know each other,
Yeah.
And often they've dated my friends. So there's like a vetting process kind of where you know each other. And it's not like the monogamous community where it's taboo to date your friend's exes, because in the polyamorous community,
we don't have that luxury.
We don't have that luxury. Yeah. We are all each other's exes. Like I have tons of Metamours or former Metamours or whatever. And like, we've all kind of dated the same people or each other. So you kind of have to just accept that the boundaries are different.
Yeah, a little bit. And I've heard similar things about the LGBT community, maybe more so in recent past than nowadays. In the city we live, there's a pretty active and thriving LGBTQIA plus community.
Yeah.
But, the poly community is significantly smaller than that community, at least like in the events that I participate in.
Yeah, like publicly.
So one thing I wanted to talk about is like, so outside of the poly community, trying to date in the default world. We'll cover online dating, which is really, really popular right now.
Yeah.
In a little bit. But first I wanted to talk about this. There are definitely considerations that you should make. Trying to flirt with somebody who you're unsure of whether they're okay with what's going on.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of cautionary tales of friends who started flirting with somebody, knew that they were already in an established relationship, and it turns out the person wanted to be in an affair,
Mm.
cheating on their partner,
Yeah.
and were upset or offended that they were being proposed a polyamorous relationship.
Mm. I've definitely had similar things happen. I've had a lot of friends come to me, unfortunately, and say things like, you're polyamorous, so you must understand such and such. And it's usually a story about them cheating or having sex with someone that they knew that was cheating on their relationship. And that's not cool. And that's not the same thing as polyamory, because the big difference is honesty
Yeah.
and consent. And so an affair is a secret.
Yeah,
And
nobody can consent to what they don't know about.
exactly. And that's not in a monogamous context, that's not the agreement. And so in a polyamorous context, it's different. And so, when it comes to like the default world and dating and kind of approaching people, I don't really do it a lot, honestly, because of so many of these kind of barriers. I find that polyamory is becoming a more acceptable idea in the mainstream for sure. Like once I explain the first couple basics to people, they kind of go, oh, okay. It may not be for them, but they kind of have maybe heard of it.
Yeah.
Or maybe have thought about it, And so it can be tricky. Yeah, online dating is a whole separate creature, but in the real world, I think one thing that polyamorous people worry about a lot is like, how soon, at one point in the flirting, do I tell this new person that I'm polyamorous, right?
Yeah.
And most people who are poly and have been for a long time say, as soon as possible, usually, like right away. I put it on all my profiles very upfront, like if I'm on a dating website, so that people know immediately. And if I meet someone at a bar or something or an event that isn't a polyamorous event, then I tell them immediately,
Yeah, and like just for my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Me personally, it's on my profiles like you. I'm very, very out, but I have sympathy for people who aren't out themselves.
Yes.
Or just trying to figure it out. And so they don't really understand the social rules. And so I would advise people to try to tell somebody, before the first date. I don't personally think there's a huge ethical violation in going through a whole first date, especially if you don't feel like you want a second date to spill your guts out and say like, hey, I'm in a polyamorous relationship. But I would take pause at doing anything more than a first date.
Yeah.
And not talking about it. And if you do that or you feel like that's necessary, realize that experienced polyamorous people are going to see that as a red flag.
Yeah.
They might consider it such a breach of trust that they aren't willing to continue dating you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, some people aren't going to find that as bad. If you're in an area where it's particularly dangerous or like socially or otherwise to be out, then I feel like you have a little bit more room to play with. But there are ways of like when you're doing online dating, anonymizing yourself a little bit so you can be a little bit more open.
Shall we talk about online dating?
Yeah. So that'd be a good segue into online dating. I used to do it a whole lot. I have, for the most part, stopped recently. Like we talked about, I went through a breakup. And so like I kicked on a few of the apps, but I have, outside of when I was in my early 20s and maybe a little bit into my mid 20s, have not had any success with online dating. I end up spending a lot of time and never get a response.
Yeah. I definitely have a couple comments about that. I have also quite a bit of experience with online dating. I've had consistent profiles on online dating websites for like probably 10 years, mostly OkCupid. There are also specifically poly apps and websites such as Open is an app.
Open.
Yeah. Open Minded is a website that is poly specific, etc. So, there are a few different options out there. And obviously like the dating world is full of a mixture of different kinds of people. So there are other poly people out there, but online dating is very tricky. For me, the experience has been mostly at matching with my friends, like people I already know, people I don't necessarily have chemistry with, but I do know them, and they're often in the poly community. So So I just match with my friends like over and over. That's a lot of it. And it's because they're local and it's because we have similar views about a lot of things. So the algorithms match us, right? And I I don't think I think maybe in 10 years I've probably been on one date as a result of online dating, maybe two, but probably one. It's not been very successful for me. Like I said earlier, I mostly date within the polyamorous community, like IRL. And it's harder for men because the dating world is all about like pursuing women,
Yeah.
and they have to like really stand out in a unique way to get attention. And I know that that's hard for like all my male friends. They feel like there aren't really options for them the same way that there are for women.
So I've seen effectively what ends up happening in most, if not all, dating apps. There's this feedback loop of, from my experience being a guy, go try to do the thing of reading through somebody's profile, determine whether I'm interested in them, trying to find something on their profile that I feel like I can comment in a way that'll stick out, because I don't want to just send someone, hey.
Yeah.
That's probably not going to get responded to at all. And then doing that over and over and over and over
It's
again.
a lot of work.
And so you see men get discouraged by that and just try a shotgun approach where they swipe right, they message every single person they can with the same or similar things over and over and over again, hoping to get one.
Mm-hmm.
And the flip side of that, in heterosexual pairings, women getting lots of inane, repetitive, not tied to their interests at all messages. And so going on, seeing a flood of inbox, maybe reply to one or two people who really stand out to you, and then not responding to anybody ever again. It's a weird system that hasn't worked for me.
Yeah.
At least recently.
Yeah. Well, it hasn't really worked for me either. And I'm on the flip side in a lot of ways. So it's really tricky. I don't really know what the solution is when it comes to online dating. I doubt it's any more successful for monogamous people. That's why I tend to date in the community, you know? So it's hard for sure. I find that real life events are the best ways to meet people because you can click in person.
Yes.
And you can have a natural conversation and you're not fighting these algorithms the way we are on Tinder. So yeah, it's hard.
So my general advice to people would be try to be kind and thoughtful.
Yeah.
And if you find someone interesting, like approach them. If you are someone who is used to always being pursued, try at some point to step outside your comfort zone and talk to somebody. It's really intimidating and like has gotten steadily easier with age. I've been dating since I was 14 or so. And so it's a long time I've been spending developing those skills and occasionally getting turned down. But I've been turned down very few times, but I'm also pretty picky and try to go after people I think might be interested in me.
Yeah.
And that whole process is a weird, not quite exact science.
For sure.
It's all about trying to feel out a situation and approaching somebody in a way that you feel like is going to respect them and their time. So maybe we should go through some of the definite no-nos.
Yeah, just real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
I think that what you said is great, and I agree with stepping outside of your comfort zone. As a woman, especially a woman who dates other women too, it can be tricky for different reasons because there's like this phenomenon among queer women that we have a really hard time approaching each other because we've been taught by society that men do the approaching. And if there's no man in the scenario, then like who does the approaching?
Yeah.
So that's one reason that queer women don't approach each other. And, it can be hard for women to approach men too because we've been taught, again, that men do the approaching. But I've been definitely the assertive party in almost all of my relationships, and I like it that way. If I'm interested in someone, I let them know. And, I'm not pushy. We'll talk about some no-nos in a second, but I generally make myself very clear, and express my interest. And if they're not interested, that's totally fine. But like you, I have not been turned down many times.
Yeah.
And I think that shooting your shot will often get you places that you just didn't expect.
Yep. Yeah, I don't, ascribe to that whole idea of like in my league, out of my league. If someone is interesting to me, then I ask them out, and the worst thing that they can say is no. I guess the worst thing they could say is like "fuck you," I'm never talking to you ever
I've never
again.
seen that happen though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, what you were saying definitely rings true in my experiences watching my partners trying to flirt.
Yeah.
I've watched my partners try to flirt with both women and men,
Mm-hmm.
and watching two people who you've heard independently are interested in each other and who have both been told that the other one is interested, and watching them not be able to like one person make that step is infuriating to me. It's like,
Yeah.
just do the one thing.
It's really hard.
It's hard. It's really intimidating, and I get it. But you, at some point, you got to try.
You do. It's true. The
Or
worst
else
thing
you're
they
gonna
can
lose
say
out.
is no. Yeah. I'm in a Facebook group called Make a Move, You Useless Sapphic, because such a trope that queer women, like especially, have a hard time approaching each other.
I would be so pleased. I was thinking back in the setup to recording this episode of like, had I ever been approached and asked out on a date? And to my memory, and if you know me personally, let me know if I'm misremembering. To my memory, I don't remember a single time.
Wow.
You know, I've dated a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah.
In my lifetime. You know, I've dated well over 30 people in my entire life. And to never of any of those been approached, I think causes a little bit of a complex at times of like, oh, what is my value? Am I interesting? Or are people only saying yes because of X, Y, or Z factor?
Yeah, I understand.
Anyways, so on to the things that are not acceptable.
Yeah.
Don't mess with people or ask them out on a date if they're working.
Yeah.
They're being nice to you because they're paid to do so more often than not. And it's not a good thing. If you were going to do that, the only way I would think it's ethical is to do so like written piece of paper in a location that's not like somewhere you return to. Is like, hey, if you are interested, here's my phone number. That is the only thing I could think of, and even that I feel like is a little in poor taste, and can put someone on in a spot of discomfort.
I agree, and there's a power differential there, and it's important to think about, because if someone is at work, they're trapped, and they're literally, in danger of losing their job if they're not nice to you. And so this happens a lot with female baristas and male customers, or I worked in strip clubs for 4 years, and I had couples come in a lot and they were looking for a unicorn. They really thought that they were going to be able to take a stripper home. And it's not common, so don't think that that's a thing. It's not.
There are other types of sex workers that are willing to do that.
Hire a sex worker. Yeah, hire a sex worker. Hire a full-service sex worker. There are ways to do that. There are ways to find, a third for a threesome that don't involve a stripper, anyway, or a barista. So, don't mess with people while they're at work. I agree with you completely on that.
So outside of that, were other things that you feel like are bad form in dating, like being too pushy? I think is definitely one. Asking somebody over and over and over again. Recently, I did a dumb thing and asked someone who I'd had a brunch with a month ago and who had told me during that brunch, like, oh, I'm not dating right now. It's a month later, I completely forgot, and I asked them out, and they're like, oh, hey, like, I just got a really long relationship and I'm not dating anybody right now. I was like, you told me that.
Yeah. I think that sometimes people aren't sure what being too pushy might look like when they're trying to flirt with or pursue someone. We've talked a couple times about situations in which there's a power differential. Some other examples of that, other than like the workplace, involve significant age differences, maybe. I think that, as long as everyone is a consenting adult, like it's totally fine to date or whatever, anybody of any age, 18 and above. But there is something to be said about like an 18-year-old young woman being pursued by like a 50-year-old person, because I feel like the difference in life experience is such that it causes an imbalance of power between the two parties. So, an 18-year-old isn't going to have the kind of sex education and societal education and, life experience, consent knowledge, like that someone of a significantly higher age would. So, You just need to be aware of these kinds of power differentials that exist in the world,
Yeah.
whether or not they're just and fair. Men have more power than women. It's just a fact in America. And white people have more power than black people, and all of these other issues. So I think it's important to just try to treat everybody with respect as best you can. And that's definitely important when it comes to like flirting and pursuing people.
I feel like I'm definitely missing something obvious, 'cause I'm trying to think of other times where it's not as acceptable or as a bad idea to be pursuing somebody, but I'm drawing a blank right now. Is there anything else that you can think of?
I think it can be tricky with coworkers.
Yes.
Because if you do date, there is workplace potentially drama. Maybe you have to keep your relationship a secret, especially if you're polyamorous and they know you're already married or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a whole different issue. As well as if the relationship ends, then you're stuck working together.
Yeah.
And that can be really toxic because you might need space from each other, and at work, you can't get that.
Definitely. Well, I think we covered a lot of great ground. Is there anything that you want to say in closing before we end this segment?
Be bold, shoot your shot, but respect people while you do it.
That's a great summary. I don't think I can do any better. Thanks, Elisabeth.
Mhm.
And up next will be another segment.
All right.
And now on to our next segment, Relationship Amateur Hour.
Woo.
So it's going to be me and Elisabeth again.
Hello.
So we're calling this Relationship Amateur Hour because you and I are not professionals in the sense that like we're not counselors, we're not medical
therapists.
professionals, therapists, anything like that. So all of our opinions and everything are based on our own experiences and what we feel like would be useful answers. So
Yes.
take everything we say with whatever caution you feel like that deserves. So we have a few questions. You want me to start or you want to start?
You have them in your hand. You go ahead.
All right. So the first question we have is, what are your tips for dealing with a monogamous Metamour?
That's a big one.
Yeah, that is a big one. So to give people a little bit of background, because maybe some people will be surprised to hear that polyamorous people would date
monogamous
people.
Yeah. But they do actually pretty frequently.
Yeah.
I've seen lots of monogamous poly couples. Just because you're monogamous doesn't necessarily mean that you want to change what your partner does.
Yeah.
Some monogamous people are perfectly happy just dating one person, and then that one person can potentially date other people.
And some polyamorous people feel comfortable being monogamous relationships for periods of time, or
That's true.
for the foreseeable
Yeah.
future. I know plenty of people who are very into their relationship with a monogamous partner, and even though they identify as polyamorous, it's either that desire to or practice of, and so it can be one or the other. You can just feel like you are capable of having multiple relationships and identify as polyamorous.
I think it's kind of like being bisexual. You can be bisexual, but in a relationship with a single person of any gender,
Definitely.
So just because you're in a relationship with a particular person doesn't make you not bi or not poly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So back to the question, what are the tips we have for dealing with a monogamous Metamour? I think step one would be making sure, just like with any relationship, make sure that you are, you have good, clear boundaries.
Yeah.
That you set up time to negotiate your relationship.
Yeah. It's possible they might not want anything to do with you, and that's okay. You don't have to be best friends with every Metamour.
Yes.
You really don't. And you're allowed to have boundaries, and you're allowed to limit the number of even friends in your life and partners. And so you don't have to, push yourself farther than you want to. But if you have a monogamous Metamour, one thing I would say is upfront, very quickly, communicate how much you want to be involved in each other's lives, or how much you want to. Do you want to be Facebook friends? Do you want to text each other? Do you want to hang out? Do you want to never see each other? All those are legitimate options.
Yeah, I think unless you're highly invested in having a don't ask, don't tell relationship, that you request or make a demand to meet them at least once. It helps humanize, yourself and your Metamour.
It does.
Your Metamour would be your partner's partner for people who aren't sure about what we mean by that word.
Yep.
So a lot of the work is going to be done by your partner in an ideal world.
True.
And, so having good established relationship boundaries with that partner is more what I was kind of referencing earlier. Not as much, don't let your partner dictate a lot of the work, emotional labor to be done by yourself. If they want to date multiple people, I think it's fair to take the responsibility of having some of that responsibility for the emotional labor. It doesn't mean that you don't have to have any sort of help with it. It doesn't mean that you can't talk about it. But if somebody is saying, oh, this is your problem,
Yeah.
deal with it, that would be a relationship for me I would step out of.
Yeah, me too, for sure.
So outside of setting up healthy boundaries, are there other recommendations you feel like you would have?
Other than the boundaries and the clear communication, especially right up front, those are really the bare basics that you need to sketch out what kind of dynamic you want with your Metamour.
Yeah.
And Metamours can be best friends.
Yeah.
And they can be housemates and they can be many things together, but they don't have to be. And it's okay to have space from your Metamour. It's okay not to want to be friends with your Metamour. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. One of my past relationships and one of my current relationships, while I was dating them at the same time, they would talk very often, at least weekly, and chit chat. It provided good insight into living with me and being in a relationship with me. I have heard word from them both that occasionally they would check in and be like, hey, is this normal for Kevin?
Right.
Because one of them had been dating me for a few months and the other had been dating me for several years.
Yeah.
And so they had a little better understanding of like, oh no, that's normal for Kevin.
Yeah.
You can,
exactly.
That'll be something that will probably be around, behavior that'll be around for longer than you are. So, that's something to be considerate
Yeah.
of.
Metamours can be amazing allies. They really can.
Yes.
They can be great resources. They can be great insight, like you said, into your partner. It's amazing what you can learn from someone who's spent time with your partner in a different setting.
Yep.
So
it's one of those things where it can be very, very fun to team up against your shared partner at times, at least jokingly, to like joke around and have fun at their expense a little bit, as long as it's not mean or
as long as it's all above board.
Yes. So other than that, I would say for me, when I don't spend a lot of time thinking about my Metamours, to be honest, because I do a lot of work in partner selection, and my ethos is very much one of I'm not here to control other people's behaviors or relationships. And so if I'm very unhappy with my Metamour and I make that clear to my partner in a way that doesn't make them feel pressured, but understand that it's a deal breaker for me if things don't change, then the only thing I can really do outside of that, I'm not going to sit outside and yell and scream at somebody or get into fight with somebody. I'm just going to break up with the person who I'm dating if I'm not getting along with their monogamous Metamour.
Yeah, it can be tricky. It really can. It's possible that the monogamous Metamour might feel threatened, or like they might be replaced, or they might be envious of the time you spend together. So that's why I think the communication is so important, because maybe they don't want to see you with their partner. Maybe they do, know?
All these, like, outside of the fact that we're saying it's a monogamous Metamour, all these are normal for every poly person, every person in a polyamorous relationship. So it extends to those monogamous people that are dating a polyamorous person who is dating someone else.
One other thing I would say is, if you want to be supportive of your monogamous Metamour, encourage them to build strong friendships and pursue their own hobbies.
Yes.
Because when your partner is away, don't waste time pining over them. They'll be back. Go do something fun that they don't like. Go see a horror movie. Go play putt-putt. Like, go dancing, go
and set it up ahead of time.
Yeah, set it up ahead of time for sure. Go do D&D. Like, distract yourself. Enjoy yourself. And I very much believe in that, whether you're monogamous or poly.
So for people who don't know, D&D is Dungeons and Dragons. It's a tabletop role-playing game. Google it when you get home.
Google it.
All right. Do you anything else that you want to share on that topic? I feel like a lot of it is along the same lines of any other polyamorous relationship. And so any of our other advice would be completely applicable
Yeah.
to this scenario outside
Communicate,
of,
boundaries,
yeah,
space.
outside of like telling your you can't tell your monogamous Metamour to go like date someone else
Yeah.
to try to fill needs that may not be met. But outside of that, I feel like you're kind of in the same boat as you would be otherwise.
Yeah, for sure.
So the next question I got here are, what are some of the key questions to ask yourself before pulling the plug on the relationship?
Okay, so a big one for me is whether or not I feel drained or energized by that person. For me, it's super black and white. I mean, it's a spectrum, but there's a middle. And on one side, people drain me, and on the other side, they energize me. So if my partners are draining me, it's probably not compatible. I need people around me who give me life and
Yeah.
who support me in energy ways and in all other ways. So for me personally, it's not personal, it's not bad blood. And this applies to friendships too, and pets and, coworkers. Like you don't have to spend time around people necessarily if they drain you. And so that applies to relationships too, for sure.
I feel like I'm a terrible person to ask this because I feel like I always stay in relationships for way too long. So my key things would be ask any questions that you feel are important, not only of yourself, but also of your partner, and try to bring them into an understanding of what are your needs, how are you feeling.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is similar to Elizabeth. For me, I am someone who I'm very affected by my partners. And like, so emotionally, I feed off of them, or like, can create positive or negative feedback loops. And it's important for me to try to partner select for people who understand me, understand what I'm about, share my same values, and that on the whole, when I look at the sum of a month, that there's at least been a break even of like good and bad times.
Yeah. There need to, for me, at least be 50% or more of good
Yeah.
times. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because relationships aren't, I'm not a fair weather relationship person.
Yeah.
I don't think you are
No.
either. And so we're not trying to say only date people if it's only positive experiences
No.
100% of the time,
Yeah.
but people who are willing to step up to bat for you and take care of you, as well as like people who allow you to take care of them in ways that benefit the both of you.
Absolutely. In my opinion, a relationship should be mutually beneficial. Any kind of relationship.
Definitely. Anything else that you'd like to add to that last question?
Let's hear the question one more time.
What are some key questions to ask yourself before pulling the plug on a relationship? Do I feel like I'm threatened?
Yeah.
Do I feel safe and secure? Do I feel happy outside of my time with them, but only unhappy around them?
Those are great questions.
Yeah, only feeling unhappy all the time could be a sign of depression or other
Yes.
mental health problems.
True.
But only being depressed around one specific person could mean a relationship problem that's solvable. It could be a incompatibility between the two of you.
Exactly. That's true. Some people just bring you down in ways that you don't need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else that you feel like would be important to add to that?
I have to say, like, relationships can be flexible. I've
Yes.
had people, long-term relationships that I've broken up with and got back together with years later. And, the relationship is different. It's always going to change. But you don't have to feel pressured into dating everybody all the time. Like, just pick and choose the people that energize you and who support you and who share your goals.
Yeah.
And that's really all you have to do. So if those things aren't met though, and if you don't feel energized and if you don't feel inspired and if you don't feel comfortable in the relationship, then maybe it's time to take a break, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I try to do, although I don't do it very well, is like pull outside of myself and try to third person think about my situation as objectively as I can.
Yeah.
We're subjective beasts. We are always experiencing everything all around us, but do what you can to pull yourself third person and think about if your friend presented you with the problems you're being presented with. Um, would you tell that person to break up?
Exactly.
Would you tell that person to try to find a solution? What would your advice be to someone else? I always see people treating their friends way better than they treat themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So treat yourself as well as you treat others.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for these 2 questions. We'll be back for another Relationship Amateur Hour next episode.
All right. Sounds good. You can find us on Twitter, through email, or on Reddit. To submit your questions or to recommend topics, please reach out to our contact info in the show notes.
This episode was edited by Jordan Davis. Music is by Anti-Lude, and logo designed by Carmen Bolding.